Good evening, everyone. Welcome to The Healthier You with Wendy, a guide to living a healthy, active, and productive life. Tonight, we're going to talk about something of importance: how we communicate our needs for health and wellness. How do we communicate our needs for love? How do we communicate our needs for taking breaks and de-stressing? So we have two very special guests here with us tonight. McCall Jones, a founder for Institute of Adult Communications, and then we also have Jonathan Tran, who's a California Policy and Program Manager for CRAC, Southeast Asia Resource Action Center up in Sacramento. And I know you're back in town for a couple of days, and thank you for being here, and welcome home.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
So now let's dive right into it. So we were just talking about how do we communicate our needs, and why is this so important to communicate our needs?
Well, first, Wendy, thanks for having us. Appreciate the topic. It's a very powerful one and a very important one. As the founder of the Institute for Adult Communication, one of the biggest breakdowns I see with most people is we basically walk around not having our needs met. We go to work and we don't have the needs for resources met. We go home, we don't have our needs met. When we need free time, we don't have our needs met. It's this constant rolling syndrome of just living our lives perpetually without our needs met. And we know that it produces stress. We also know that while stress is healthy for us in short bursts, stress in the long term lowers our immune systems and ultimately leads to disease. We know that about 80% of the diagnosed diseases are the result of a lowered immune system. So when we see that it's a continuum of not getting our needs met, it ultimately has a very severe impact on our health. So the first step to getting one's needs met is ultimately to ask for help. And the downside is that we all have this built-in reluctance to asking for help. Culturally, there can be a difference because some cultures don't believe that they should ask for help. Other cultures, certainly here in the US, there's a fear of appearing to be broken, or that, oh, there's something wrong if you need to ask for help. But people who are very successful in life know that it's impossible for them to do anything without asking for help. And that help can include, obviously, money, so we ask for help to go get a job. When we need food and we need help, our supermarket is a source of help. Our car is a source of help. Therefore, manufacturers are sources of help. But when we think about ourselves, we don't think of ourselves as important, and we don't think about our well-being, our physical well-being, our sleep, our mental well-being that's caused from the stress of work. We don't look at those are areas where we also need help. And as a result, we let ourselves go and we feel miserable and think, oh, it's my fault that I'm miserable, instead of how can I get unmiserable?
Right. Now, I know, Jonathan, you mentioned a little bit about, when it comes to asking for help, and certain cultures and come across certain challenges, and why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I guess to kind of provide a little bit of background. So the organization I work for was established when the first wave of refugees from Southeast Asia were coming to the United States. And so a lot of the work actually focuses on working with community members that have historically been disenfranchised from the government, find difficulty adjusting culturally, right? So historically, these communities really have a lot of difficulty in terms of integrating into the existing system. What happens, I think, a lot of times is that they kind of look at the notion of asking for help in the context of attracting a lot of shame for even engaging in the conversation of seeking assistance from outside of their immediate families. And so unfortunately it manifests into a lot of the social problems, and not only just social problems, but actually physical problems that we see today on a regular basis. Over the last couple of years, we've seen healthcare costs rise significantly. A lot of that is actually the result of the lack of preventative care, and the fact that a lot of folks in our community really don't like going to the doctor, really don't like seeking out services until there's something wrong, until they unfortunately get really, really ill.
Now, McCall, what are some of the advice you have for these individuals to communicate their needs? For example, let's say I have a problem, I am looking for help and I need a vacation, I'm stressed, very stressed, and how do I communicate to my surroundings that I'm stressed and I need a break or I need a vacation? How do I justify that? Give me a couple details, examples of some of the things that I could do.
Sure. The Institute provides coaching and training to individuals in groups. And the first thing we address as part of our coaching is give an individual's relationship with themselves. We are trained from the time we're in the cradle to respect other people, think of other people, do for other people, serve other people. That extends into our employers. But we're never really taught the importance of taking care of ourselves, of thinking of ourselves as individuals as important. So no matter what culture we come from, there seems to be this universal reluctance to ask for help. It could be because of integration and cultural and shame. It could be because, oh no, I'm broken. And in fairness, it all boils down to shame in one form or another. So the very first thing that we address is having the person realize and embrace that they are important, that they are worth having their needs met, that for them to be their best selves, they need to have their needs met, and that their needs being met are actually important. And as human beings, we have a lot of needs. We have the need to eat, we have the need to sleep, we have the need to go on vacation. But we also have the need for acknowledgement. We also have the need for respect. And the list goes on.
Right. And I know you mentioned about, communicating the need for respect, for love. And I know that, a lot of times individuals and professionals come across a challenge of communicating our needs for love. How do we communicate to our family, friends, and support group and surroundings that we need that constant emotional support and that love?
Well, I was just going to contribute in the context. I think it's very difficult to kind of jump into it and declare that today I'm going to love myself, right? I think like similar in the way how New Year's resolutions rarely ever work out because
I can attest to that.
I think it's just difficult to instantly have that change and to put that pressure on yourself to believe that you can suddenly begin to start loving yourself because you declare it. I think it takes a work in progress, right? I think one, it's the ability to forgive oneself. Right, I think a lot of the shame is actually self-produced, right? A lot of the conflicts that we feel are manufactured within ourselves and our own psyches and how we feel about ourselves. So I think the first step is self-forgiveness, right? And part of that is giving yourself a realistic and reasonable timeline to begin that healing process. Because the truth is that the trauma that we experience that creates that shame, creates those conflicts, didn't happen overnight. And that it takes time to begin to heal that process and to not have the pressure of suddenly believing that everything's going to be okay just because you make this declaration, because you set up a New Year's resolution that you're going to be okay, right? That acknowledging that it does take time to go about doing that.
Now, what about for individuals who are from the onset, they are very accomplished and they're very successful. They have walked through a path to get to where they're at. But certain individuals might not have had a very fortunate childhood. So there's that trauma aspect of it. Let's say, maybe a terrible experience growing up. For these individuals, they constantly, and how should they communicate their need for love or their need for that emotional support? Because I notice that a lot of times it's very hard, very challenging to talk about these things openly.
Well, I'd love to jump on a word that Jonathan used, and that's declaration. Because I completely agree with you that once you declare something, it doesn't automatically mean it's going to follow through. But here's how we approach it. The declaration is the most important thing that you do to begin the process. Because I completely agree, it's absolutely a process. And inside of that declaration, if you're responsible for it, you'll also create the process that will enable you to fulfill on that declaration. So we know now that our physical health, for example, is largely socially driven.
Right.
We are about as fit as our friends.
Right.
And we hang out with fit friends, we inevitably get fitter. There's science behind this now. You hang out with rich friends, you're inevitably going to get richer.
part of influence, circle of
The circle of
influence.
influence.
I might need some fitter friends.
It rubs off.
So there's a reality of that. But one of the things that is the cornerstone of our coaching is that our speaking is the most powerful tool that we have in our possession to both create and manage our lives. And through our coaching, we raise the validity and the awareness of what our speaking, the power that our speaking possesses, what our speaking creates. I mean, your show exists because you declared one day in the past that you were going to have this show, right?
Right.
Right, beautiful. No one said, hey, Wendy, I want you to do a show for us. Or did they? You declared it, right? And then here we are. And you said, okay, to have this show be a reality, I'm going to call guests. I'm going to find a place to have the show. I'm going to do the show every week or every month. I don't know how often you do it. And you just kept it going. So you declared it, so you created it, and then you managed it by asking for help. You asked us for help to come and help you do the show today. You asked the crew for help so that they can come out here and help cameras. You can't. It's impossible for you to do the show on your own.
So, go
I was
ahead.
going to say, in some contexts, that's clear. But when we think about the context of our healthcare and our personal well-being, we rarely associate managing our health and well-being as something that we actually need help doing.
Right. So, just to piggyback on the need for having that physical, emotional support and mental well-being. So, for example, if I'm coming across, with a challenge of I need to communicate the need for love and support, for most women, how do we go about communicating that to our surroundings and our partners?
Many people, especially women in this situation, will hint, and they will beg, and they will complain.
That's a good way of going about it.
Men especially short circuit behind all of those things. We're not built to receive complaining. It literally shuts us down because we are trying to support, we're always trying to help, we're always trying to be there for our partners. Well, the good guys, right?
Right.
But what happens inside of being indirect and being inside of a complaint is that there's no action for us to take. So we're literally paralyzed. We're literally stuck in that space where we can't take action.
So what do you want me to do about it is usually the answer,
Exactly.
right?
So the question is, what would you actually like me to do? Oh, it's not that big a deal is the answer that comes back, right? So what happens is the feminine very often minimizes its own needs. So what I encourage women to do is simply be straight about it. Ask for what you need. But the answer comes back, if he loved me, he'd know. Well, I get the instinct for that. But the catch is, whether he loves you or not, he may not know. And if you minimize what your needs are, you actually confuse the equation and his ability to help you. So we need you to be direct. It's not a preference. We can't function unless you're direct. Honey, I need you to fix the car.
No, but when you use the word "I need you to fix the car," sometimes it comes off being perceived as a woman being demanding, because I think I notice that a lot of times it's a different communication style where if I have to ask, then when it's done, it's not the same anymore. So how do we clarify that miscommunication? And also now, just jumping onto the other side of the fence, how does men communicate their need for love?
Beautiful. This begins to get into the meat of our work, because there's an awareness on the part of both sides that the way they do it is the way it needs to be done. So men typically operate inside our logical, factual, reasoned, action-oriented problem-solving way. The feminine is going to exist in experiential, to have a good experience, pleasant company, avoid conflict, avoid displeasing, and is going to act inside that, and is certainly going to act inside their emotional. So you mentioned, if I have to ask, it sort of changes things, but here's the other side of not asking. One of the things that we speak about is the process called what we call the invisible demand. And an invisible demand it's painted like a question or a comment. But what it really is it's an invisible order to do something. So a complaint is an invisible order. It expresses, I'm displeased. It's expressing, I need something done. but it's not being clear enough that the other person can probably
Right.
actually
So
as if the expectation is already there.
Exactly.
Right. So the takeaway would be in terms of communication for women, I have to let you know very clearly, this is what I want, this is how I want it, and this is the timeline, and done. This is it. So after we're going to take a quick break, and after the break, we'll come back and talk about the details and nitty-gritties of how to communicate our needs for love, for vacation, and methods of improving that style. We'll be right back after the break. Well, welcome back. Now we're going to talk about how we could communicate our needs for love as a woman or as a man. So, now I know we talked quite a bit about how we could effectively communicate. Now, here's an example. Now, for a woman communicating, telling men that I want to understand you, or I want you to show me that you love me. So how do women, what are some of the things that women could teach themselves to understand or decode some of the behaviors?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's more help out there now than there was around what love looks like for people, and that your partner doesn't necessarily require love the same way that you do. Mm-hmm. So we know, for example, that while some people need quality time as receiving love, other people need physical touch, other people need gifts, other people need acts of service.
Right.
So once you identify which one is yours, then you can ask for it.
Right. The five love
love languages. Exactly.
The five different love languages.
Yes.
And now that helps with our emotional well-being, understanding the circumstances and communicating our love and care for our surroundings. It helps us emotionally, and in return it helps us professionally as well. Now, Jonathan, why don't you give me some of the examples of how individuals or young professionals communicate their need for emotional support or for love?
Yeah, I think in the context of our dialogue today, I think I would like to move it beyond just saying that it's male and female relationships. I think this applies across the board, whether it's heterosexual relationships, same-sex relationships, right? I think these elements all play into it, right? There are significant differences between men and women, but
right.
I think they play out in very similar fashions, regardless of whether it's a heterosexual relationship or a same-sex relationship, right? So I think that's one element that I would add to it. I think in the context of being able to acknowledge what love is, I think that's such a metaphysical question, right?
That's $1 million
right?
question.
I mean, growing up in our family, we never communicated love in the traditional methods, right? We see what love is on television, but coming from a very immigrant working class family, like, we did not have the white picket fence. My parents never say "I love you," right? Like that's just not how it plays out in our family. Right. But I think part of the interpretation is does that mean they don't love you, or the reality is the fact that, like, my parents, instead of asking whether or not, or saying I love you, they asked whether I've eaten or not that day, right? And in terms of how they go about demonstrating love and support, I think that's really important to acknowledge how your partner or your family member or your friends, how they go about articulating and showing their love, right? Because it might not be the same way that we understand or how we would demonstrate it, but at the same time, it's just important to acknowledge where they're coming from in regards to how they go about showing it.
Right, and here's an example. It echoes with my own experience. I remember a few years ago, I got a message from my mom saying, "I love you," and my first response was,
What's wrong? Is everything okay?
Right. Why is my mother telling me that she loves me over text message? And in the traditional Asian culture, this is something very, you can love somebody, but you don't necessarily say it out loud, so you don't verbally communicate that. Over time, I learned that, I said sometimes communicating that you love somebody is almost as important as loving somebody. And having the need to de-stress, to take breaks, it's almost, communicating that need is almost as important as having that need fulfilled. Now, that goes back to emotional well-being at work, while interacting with our surroundings. How do we communicate to our superiors, to our surroundings, that we need to take vacation, we need time to de-stress and to relax? How do we do that?
Well, you bit off many bites of a bunch of different cakes there. As Jonathan was pointing out, love comes in a variety of forms, and it's also received in a variety of forms. So what we can take from that is that love is very complex, because you both mentioned speaking love, sharing love, and you also spoke about acts of love. And it's sort of like a stew. All of those elements are important to build a space of love, to have a loving relationship, because you can say, I love you all day long, but it's not enough. You can you can bring flowers and bring dinners and buy concert tickets all day long. It's not enough. It's a combination of those things that produces what I would call an experience of love. Right? So it's a very complex thing. I forget the next part of it.
Communicating our need to build that bond, to have de-stress time, spa time. There we go.
There we go. I just want to throw in that it gets back to declaration. Even if she does believe, hey, if you loved me, you'd take out the trash, create an agreement around it. If you loved me, honey, you'd take out the trash. Do we agree on that?
So basically having, goes back to having that clear line of communication. Honey, if you love me, you're going to take me out to once a week for a date night. Or you're going to tell me that these are the things that you're doing to show your love. Now, Jonathan, did you have something?
Yeah, I think to respond to the part about how do you go about communicating to like superiors in a work environment, that you need to have that separation between work life and create that sort of balance. I think I'm realistic in the context of like, not everyone has a liberty when it comes to those types of jobs, right? Like, unfortunately, because of the economics, because there is poverty, right, that people don't have that kind of luxury to be able to demand vacation time, right? We're just trying to fight to get things above minimum wage, or even have vacation time or sick time or some type of health coverage, right? So given the reality that there are situations where you can't make those types of demands, right, where not every work environment is supportive of creating a work-life balance, I think the alternative is to create that in family spaces, right? I think it's very important to not only seek the self-love, but also do it as a group activity, right? That the wellness doesn't have to be exclusive to an individual, but be able to, you can create those types of environments and spaces where you can have that type of healing collectively. And it doesn't have to be exclusive in terms of like an individual day spa, but family day spa, right? And those types of, I think a little more practical for families that don't have the type of resources or don't have the type of flexibility in terms of seeking out the type of care that they need.
So now, so just to combine the two topics we've been talking about, communicating our needs for love and our needs for understanding the need to have that de-stress time. So, the bottom of it is we all have limited time and resources, and how do we go about effectively asking directly that, well, I need you to show me acts of love, or I need you to give me a week or 2 weeks off a year so that I could take a vacation. And how do we go about doing that?
Well, it gets back to how you hold yourself. Do you hold yourself as someone who's worthy of having those things? Do you declare that you are worthy?
So now I know I deserve 2 weeks of vacation every year, and I know that I deserve to be loved by my friends, families, and surroundings. Now,
you ready for a bit of a surprise there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the difference is in a word. Now, what I said was being worthy, and you threw in deserve. And how we separate the two, being worthy is about you've earned it, you've negotiated for it, you've worked on it, you've developed you've put in the time to produce that time off. When we talk about I deserve it, the way we use it, the way we look at it, that when people say that they deserve something, it ends up being kind of arbitrary. I deserve it, I should just have it. And then we start to slip into little pieces of entitlement. So when we introduce getting needs like that met, because as Jonathan pointed out, it's not so readily available. I mean, these organizations have structures. Now, it's a big thing to say, but if you're not a fit in that structure, it's your responsibility to your own health and well-being to leave that structure. And I'm not making light of the economic realities. What I'm really pointing to is that our life and our well-being is literally a holistic move. If we take our health seriously and we take our well-being seriously, it also means we take seriously the elements in our lives and in our environments, because we are inseparable from our environments. When we take our environment seriously, we will then begin to add things to our environment that are better for us, that are healthier for us. If we recognize that bad food is in our environment, what do? We get rid of the bad food, we introduce better food. If we get that our cousin doesn't live life in a way that's healthy, or is maybe a criminal or a bad influence, I'm going to separate from that person, and I'm going to bring more people who have a positive outlook. It's the same thing. It extends in the bigger scale to our work, and our churches, and our family, and our friends, and where we go to work out. So as we take our own well-being more seriously, we realize everything, in fact, has an impact, and we can make choices to produce a different outcome.
Right. Now, quickly, 30-second, of one takeaway we can leave for our audience.
I actually really appreciate the conversation about the declaration and being very deliberate about the choices that you make as an individual, right? I think in the context of trying to deal with those circumstances that you're already in, right? Once that declaration takes place, I think it's about the deliberate and purposeful actions that take place afterwards, right? That even if you're in a situation that might not be the most welcoming, you have the opportunity to make choices moving forward, right? That it can get better as long as you personally choose to make that happen.
And I thank you, Jonathan, for pointing out the challenges that really everyone who wants to make a change like this to their lives is likely going to face. People are going to be resistant to it, sometimes openly resistant to it. The structure you're in may not really accommodate it. But with courage and with perseverance and building that structure that Jonathan just mentioned, that's how you can begin to build. And as you pointed out earlier, it's not going to be instant. It's going to be something that once you declare it, it's going to require building a structure. And it can be a very slow process. It may take years. But it's better to take those years building your well-being than spending those same years hurting yourself.
Right. Well, thank you so much for both the audience for sharing, both guests to share with us all these great tips today. And for the audience watching, thank you for tuning in. The Healthier You with Wendy, a guide to living a healthy, active, and productive life. And good night, everyone.